What happens when the cop who humiliated you ends up begging for mercy in your courtroom? He wasn't nervous, at least not at first. Officer Brent Malloy walked through the double doors of the Pulaski County Courthouse like he had 1,000 times before. His boots echoed across the tiled floor. Same uniform, same posture, same tired scowl carved into his face. The only difference today, he wasn't walking in to testify. He wasn't being called as backup. He was the one under review. He tugged at his collar, nodded at a clerk he didn't recognize, and headed toward courtroom 4B. The hallway lights above buzzed faintly, flickering at the ends, like they were trying to warn him. A few folks sat on benches along the corridor, reporters maybe. A couple of familiar officers, but no one made eye contact. He pushed the door open, stepped inside, and then everything stopped. She was already seated. Behind the bench, robe draped over her shoulders like armor, sat Judge Janelle Riggins. She didn't flinch, didn't blink, just turned the page of the folder in front of her with slow, practiced ease. The courtroom was quiet, too quiet for a hearing this high profile. Even the court reporter had her fingers still, eyes stuck on the man standing just past the threshold. Malloy stood still, mouth slightly open, eyes locked on her face. He knew that face. It had haunted him some nights, although he would have never admitted it out loud. He remembered it soaked in tears, cheeks burning with humiliation. He remembered the thick, black curls falling onto the cold courtroom floor. He remembered the way she didn't scream, didn't beg. She just sat there and let him do it. But that was 10 years ago, and now there she was, sitting higher than him, dignified, unbothered. Her natural hair framed her face in tight coils, full and proud. Her expression was neutral, but her presence said everything. "Mr. Malloy," she said evenly, her voice calm and clear, "take a seat." He blinked. "Judge Riggins," he muttered, barely audible. "I said, take a seat." He moved without thinking, nearly stumbling, as he dropped into the wooden chair across from the bench. His badge rested heavy on his chest. He didn't like the way it felt, all of a sudden, like it didn't belong. A junior prosecutor slid a stack of files onto the table beside him. Malloy barely noticed. His eyes were still locked on her. He wasn't used to looking up at someone in a courtroom. She flipped another page. "Today's hearing concerns multiple allegations of misconduct dating back 5 years, she said. "But let's be clear, we're not here to settle old scores. We're here for facts, truth, accountability." There was no emotion in her voice, no anger, no revenge. But that made it worse somehow. Because Brent Malloy was starting to realize she didn't have to raise her voice to shake a man like him. She didn't have to shout to bring the weight of justice down. And just as the bailiff called the first witness, Malloy let out a breath he didn't know he was holding. He didn't know it yet, but this was the beginning of a reckoning he couldn't outrun. But if we want to understand why this moment hits so hard, we've got to go back to where it all started. It was hot that afternoon. Not just regular Arkansas heat, smothering, thick, slow heat that sat heavy on the streets like punishment. The kind that made people tired, short-tempered, and desperate for shade. But even under that sun, Janelle Riggins stood tall. She was 19, a sophomore at the University of Arkansas at Little Rock. Pre-law major, honor student, first in her family to go to college. That day, she wasn't studying case law or prepping for finals. She was marching. They had gathered downtown near MacArthur Park. Dozens of students, faculty, and neighbors, all holding signs and chanting for police accountability. Another boy had been killed during a traffic stop in Pine Bluff. The details were murky, the footage worse. People were tired. Janelle didn't lead chants. She wasn't loud. But she showed up with a homemade sign wearing a shirt that said, "Protect, not punish." She stood near the middle of the crowd, peaceful, firm. Her mother had begged her not to go. But she went anyway, and that's when it happened. Around 4:30 p.m., the patrol units rolled in, slow at first, then fast. Officers in riot gear started barking orders, splitting the group in two. Some folks ran. Some stood still. Janelle didn't move. She didn't throw anything, didn't curse, didn't raise a fist. She just stayed. That's all it took. An officer, big, red-faced, barking orders like a drill sergeant, grabbed her by the arm, wrenched her sign from her hand. "You were told to disperse," he growled. "I'm not resisting," she said. Didn't matter. She was shoved against the side of a squad car, zip ties around her wrists, sweat pouring down her back. Her face pressed into the window while someone shouted charges she didn't understand. Obstruction, disorderly conduct, inciting unlawful assembly. It felt like a joke, but by the time she was booked, fingerprinted, and tossed into a holding cell, it wasn't funny. She sat there for almost 8 hours. No phone call, no food, no idea what time it was. Just cold concrete, a flickering light, and a whisper of fear she wouldn't let grow. But the worst part came later. They said she had to appear in court the next morning. Municipal court. No lawyer. Just her. She was barely out of holding when they dragged her into a room that looked more like a storage closet than a courtroom. And that's when she saw him. Officer Brent Malloy. He was waiting for her, not in the audience, but standing near the back wall, arms crossed, face blank. He didn't look like someone who had questions. He looked like someone who had already made up his mind. She was brought in shackled at the ankles. The judge that day, a fill-in, old and disinterested, barely looked up, just asked for a statement from the arresting officer. Malloy stepped forward, rattled off a list of exaggerated charges, then casually mentioned that Janelle had been combative and uncooperative, even threatening. That was a lie. Everyone in that room knew it, and yet no one said a word. Then came the so-called disciplinary action. One of the deputies handed Malloy a pair of clippers, said it was part of the protocol for unruly detainees being moved to central intake. Malloy didn't flinch. He walked right up to her, told her to kneel. She didn't move, so he pressed her shoulder down. "Don't make this harder," he muttered. Then came the buzz, the sharp, vibrating hum of the clippers against her scalp. Her body stayed still, but inside she was cracking. Hair fell like confetti, pieces of herself scattered on the linoleum. No one stopped him. Not the judge, not the deputies, not even the clerk. And when it was done, she wasn't allowed to touch her head. She was marched straight back to holding, where another young woman stared at her like she was broken. She wasn't. Not yet. But that day buried something inside her and planted something else. Something she wasn't ready to name yet, but it would grow. But healing didn't come easy. And silence? That became its own kind of prison. Janelle didn't speak about what happened, not right away. She went home that day wearing a borrowed hoodie from a public defender who couldn't look her in the eye. Her mother cried when she saw her. Her little brother stared, wide-eyed and confused. The curls they used to call her crown were gone. Her scalp was patchy and raw in places, but she didn't cry. Not once. Not when the photos of her circulated around campus. Not when the whispers started in class. Not even when a girl on her floor asked, "Are you the one who got shaved?" She kept her head down, focused on her coursework, avoided crowds, took the long way to lectures. Her professor said nothing. The university didn't call. The school paper ran a small piece on campus protests and arrests, but never mentioned her name. That was the part that stung the most. How easy it was for everyone to move on. Like it hadn't happened. Like she hadn't been humiliated in front of a courtroom full of people. For the next 2 semesters, she wore beanies and scarves, even as spring turned to summer. She tried to disappear, but her silence was heavy. It followed her into study halls, crept into her essays, and clung to the back of her throat when she tried to sleep. One night, she sat on the floor of her dorm bathroom, hands shaking, staring at her reflection in the mirror. It had been months since the arrest. Her hair was growing back, slowly, but something inside her still felt missing. That night, she picked up her laptop and started typing. She wrote down everything, every detail, every second, from the protest to the courtroom, from the clippers to the concrete cell. It took hours. By the time the sun was up, she had 19 pages of truth. She didn't publish it, didn't post it, she just saved it. But in that moment, something shifted. She realized the story didn't belong to them. It belonged to her, and she could carry it however she chose. The summer after junior year, she applied for internships at public defender offices across Arkansas. Not because she wanted revenge, but because she had learned something nobody had taught her in class. The law could hurt you just as easily as it could protect you. And if you didn't understand how to use it, someone else would use it against you. She finished school top of her class, got into law school in Missouri. She kept her head shaved the entire first year, not because she had to, but because she chose to. It was a reminder, a statement. And every time someone asked why she wore it that way, she'd pause, then say, "It's just hair." But the story behind it, that's different. She never said Malloy's name, not once. But she remembered. And while her life moved forward, case by case, class by class, she never let go of the girl who knelt on the floor of that courtroom. Because that girl wasn't weak. She was surviving. But while Janelle was building something solid, Malloy's world was slowly starting to crack. Brent Malloy didn't think about that day much. Not at first. He had processed it like any other paperwork, something routine, handled, done. He never saw it as excessive. Not really. It was discipline. She wasn't compliant. End of story. Or so he told himself. But over time, the shine on his badge started to fade. It wasn't sudden. It was slow. Like rust creeping into corners no one noticed until it was everywhere. 3 years after Janelle's case, a teenager in Sherwood claimed Malloy slammed him against a wall for talking slick. The boy had a dislocated shoulder, no charges filed. 2 years after that, a woman in Bryant filed a complaint after Malloy pulled her over and accused her of smuggling her own nephew. Body cam footage? Accidentally erased. He kept his job, every time. They said he was seasoned, direct, by the book. But the whispers got louder. Younger officers didn't like riding with him. Some said he had a temper. Others said he liked pushing buttons just to see what would happen. A sergeant once found him red in the face in the locker room, punching a wall after someone questioned a traffic stop. Still, he stayed on patrol, still wore the same uniform, same boots, same resting scowl. The thing about power, when you're used to having it, you don't notice how fragile it is, not until people start asking questions that don't go away. In 2023, an internal audit flagged multiple officers for repeated complaints. Malloy's name came up several times. The department downplayed it at first, but then a new city council came in and a local journalist got hold of the files. A headline ran in the Arkansas Democrat Gazette, "Pulaski officer faces pattern of complaints. Community demands action." It wasn't the kind of scandal that brings down a whole department, but it was enough to bring heat, enough to spark a hearing, enough to bring Brent Malloy into a courtroom, this time on the other side of the table. He wasn't used to being watched. He didn't like having to answer questions. He didn't like the way people whispered when he walked past the courthouse. He definitely didn't like seeing his name on the news. But even with all that noise, even with the pressure building like a storm behind his eyes, he never expected to see her again. The last he heard, she had gone to law school. Someone mentioned she clerked for a judge out in Missouri. He had even joked once at a precinct party, "She probably flipped and works in real estate now." He didn't know she was back. He didn't know she had passed the bar. And he definitely didn't know she had earned the title of Judge Riggins. So when his name was called for the misconduct hearing, and he stepped into courtroom 4B with that same tired walk, same weighty boots, same confident smirk, he wasn't prepared. He wasn't ready. Because in all the stories he told himself about how that day went, about how he was just doing his job, how she was just a loudmouth kid who got what she deserved, not once did he imagine that one day she'd be sitting on the bench, holding the very system that once failed her, in the palm of her hand. But she wasn't the only one holding power now, because the whole room was about to speak. The courtroom had never felt smaller. There were maybe 20 people inside. No cameras allowed, just a few reporters scribbling in notebooks, and a slow fan creaking above the jury box. But to Malloy, it felt like every eye in the country was on him. He sat stiff in his seat, hands clenched on the table. Across from him, Janelle Riggins, Judge Riggins, wasn't hiding behind a robe. She was standing firm in it. Not cold, not emotional, just present, in control. Her voice broke the silence. "This hearing concerns Officer Brent Malloy, badge number 6145, currently under investigation for repeated acts of misconduct and abuse of authority. Today's testimonies will determine whether these actions constitute a violation of public trust and departmental policy." She didn't look at him when she said it. That was worse than a glare. She was treating him like any other case, and he hated it. The first witness was a teenage boy named Malik Harmon. Slim build, maybe 17, dressed in khakis and a borrowed tie. He shifted nervously as he was sworn in. "Tell the court what happened," the prosecutor said. Malik took a breath. "He stopped me because I forgot to signal. I told him I was just coming home from work. He said my car looked too nice for a kid like me." Then he asked if I had drugs. Malloy exhaled hard, shaking his head slightly. Malik continued, voice steadier now. When I asked why he was searching my car, he told me I was getting smart and slammed the door on my leg. I couldn't walk right for 2 weeks. Silence. Just the scratching of a pen on a notepad. Janelle looked up. Did you file a complaint? I tried. They told me nothing could be done unless I had medical proof. My mom kept the photos, though. The prosecutor showed them, printed pictures of bruises, swelling. Malloy muttered under his breath, You kidding me? Judge Riggins didn't flinch. Officer Malloy, if you speak out of turn again, I'll hold you in contempt. He looked at her now, really looked. And for the first time, it clicked. She wasn't here for payback. She was here to do her job, just like he claimed he was doing 10 years ago. The next witness was a woman named Sandra Wells, 52, Sunday school teacher, grandmother of 4. I was stopped on my way to Bible study, she said, standing straight. I had my grandson in the back seat. Officer Malloy said he looked too pale to be mine, accused me of kidnapping, made us sit on the curb in the cold while backup came. It was humiliating. Did he apologize? Janelle asked. No, Your Honor. He told me to be more cooperative next time. Each story chipped away at the image Malloy tried to hold on to, that of the hard-nosed cop who didn't play politics, who did what had to be done. Now, that image looked ugly, small, pathetic. He shifted in his seat. When the testimonies ended, the prosecutor presented body cam footage, edited for time, but enough to see the tone, the escalation, the way Malloy handled people. Janelle sat silent through it all. No expressions, no comments, just her eyes. Focused, unreadable. Finally, she looked at him. Officer Malloy, you may respond. He stood slowly, walking to the center of the room. I've been in law enforcement for 22 years, he said. I've made mistakes, but I've always done what I thought was right. You don't always get to be polite when you're trying to keep people safe. He turned slightly, gesturing toward the witnesses. Sometimes folks only remember the bad moments, not the ones where you saved someone, not the nights you missed dinner with your own kids because you're out chasing someone else's problem. He paused. But if I'm being honest, he said, voice lower now, there were times I could have handled things better. That's the truth. He didn't look at her, but he wanted to. He wanted to say, you know who I am. But he also knew she did. And what mattered now was what she had become. Janelle sat still for a moment, then removed her reading glasses, folded her hands. This hearing isn't about whether you missed dinner. It's about whether you used your badge to punish people who didn't deserve it. That pattern has now been documented, verified, and heard under oath. She glanced toward the clock, then back at him. This court will reconvene at 10 a.m. tomorrow for final statements and judgment. With one firm tap of the gavel, the room exhaled. People stood, papers rustled. The moment thinned. Malloy didn't move. He watched her step down from the bench and walk past him toward Chambers. Their eyes met for half a second. There was no hatred there, just recognition. And for the first time in a long time, Malloy felt something shift, not outside of him, inside. But her final words, those would leave the deepest mark, and no one in that courtroom would forget what came next. The courtroom was packed the next morning. Word had gotten out, not just about the hearing, but about who was presiding over it. Locals, students, community organizers, and even a few retired officers showed up early to find a seat. There was a quiet electricity in the room, the kind people feel when they know something bigger than paperwork is about to happen. Malloy stood when she entered. It wasn't instinct. It was something else. Respect, maybe, or realization. Janelle Riggins took her place behind the bench, calm and composed as ever. Her robe was crisp. Her hair, coiled and beautiful, sat like a crown. She didn't rush. She didn't stall. She looked at the man before her. The court has reviewed the testimonies, evidence, and disciplinary history of Officer Brent Malloy, she began, voice firm. Based on a clear pattern of abuse, this court finds sufficient grounds for immediate termination from the Pulaski County Police Department. Additionally, the case will be referred to the district attorney's office for potential civil rights violations. Murmurs filled the courtroom. Malloy stood silent. No outburst, no reaction, just quiet acceptance. But before the gavel fell, Janelle lifted her eyes again. I want to say something, she said. The room went still. When I was 19 years old, I sat in this very courthouse, in that courtroom, in chains, with my hair being shaved off my head, not because it was policy, but because it was power being misused. She paused. I wasn't a threat. I wasn't armed. I wasn't even angry. I was just present, and that was enough to be punished. She looked around the room. There are people who still think that day made me a victim, but the truth is, it made me a witness to how silence protects the wrong people, how systems bend to shield those who shouldn't wear the shield at all. She leaned forward slightly, eyes steady. This bench isn't about revenge. It's about responsibility. What we let slide today becomes the standard tomorrow, and no badge, no title, no uniform puts anyone above the law. She looked at Malloy one last time. And Mr. Malloy, this isn't personal. It's public. The gavel struck once. Sharp, final, case closed. As the crowd began to rise, many eyes stayed on her. But she didn't look for applause. She didn't wait for validation. She stood, gathered her things, and walked out the same way she walked in, grounded, steady, free. Outside, the air felt lighter. One student standing near the steps whispered, "That's what justice is supposed to look like." Another nodded. "That's what it feels like." Some people will try to make you feel small so they can feel big. But the truth is, real strength isn't in who can control the room. It's in who can rise above it. If this story moved you, share it. Let it be a reminder that accountability isn't vengeance. It's healing. And sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is come back and sit in the seat they never wanted you to reach.